John Gotti was a violent and reckless hoodlum from his earliest days. Henry Hill, a young gangster, was drinking in a bar when he first came across the teenage Gotti.
All this thing, John comes in, does that work anyway, goes over to the card table and starts whacking the guy with a bat or something, with a bat or a pipe or something. Just beating this guy to hit to death. He almost killed the guy. And he might have killed the guy, I don't know. The guy might have died, you know, they might have thrown him in the trunk that night, I don't know.
Gotti had broken an unwritten rule of the mob. Violence should only be used when there are no witnesses.
He walks over, apologizes to me. Come blood all over the place. That was the first time I had ever seen him. He had a long black, top coat, leather top coat. You know, I mean, he just looked like part of a, a gangster.
It was clear Gotti feared no one. To Henry Hill, it marked Gotti as a man destined for the top.
He was a man on the rise. He was, he had his own crew. You know he was going to be somebody. You just knew it. I mean, he had that presence.
But one man stood in the way of Gotti's rise: Paul Castellano. He was the head of the Gambino crime family, the most powerful of all the Mafia families in the U.S. Castellano was an old-style hood, a mafioso who disguised his crimes behind a veneer of respectability.
Paul wore two hats. He could mingle with lawyers, real estate, businessmen and developers, doctors, talk their language. Then he wore his Gambino family hat, and he could sit there and discuss why this guy's got to get killed and say, okay, he's got to go.
Gotti would have to eliminate Castellano to become boss. But Gotti was not the only one who wanted him out of the way. In 1983, President Ronald Reagan declared war on organized crime. The target was the Mafia's ruling body, known as the Commission. On it sat Paul Castellano. Under America's tough anti-mafia RICO legislation, crime fighters could prosecute Castellano and the other bosses for running a criminal enterprise, if they could prove the Commission was meeting. The Commission was so secret, the only proof the FBI had was from 1957, when police raided an infamous mob gathering. Then, one morning in 1984, FBI agent Joe O'Brien received a call from a mole inside the Mafia.
He informed me that there was going to be what's known as a Mafia Commission meeting in a couple of hours. I didn't believe him, to be honest with you, because this was pretty much unheard of. These guys cannot afford to meet. It can be very incriminating to them.
If the FBI could get a photograph of this meeting, it would help destroy the Commission. O'Brien and fellow agent Andy Currens staked out this building, a small house on Cameron Avenue, Staten Island, that belonged to a relative of a senior Mafia don. The agents hid in the back of an unmarked van, a few hundred yards down the road.
The van was right back here, right about where the white car is, right in front of the 54 there. That's about where we were parked. And we had a nice straight shot. There were no cars at that time. We had a straight shot down the street to 34 Camera.
So we sat there for 3 hours, till about 4:30. And then they started coming out crime family by crime family.
The top men in the Gambino, the Lucchese, the Colombo, and the Genovese families all emerged.
Then finally our long-awaited guest of honor, if you will, Paul Castellano came out.
Castellano was the boss of bosses.
It was like the king strutting out. You could almost envision a carpeted area. It was a real show of how the mob operates and mob protocol.
It was very exciting. I don't know how Andy managed to keep the camera as still as he did. He used this shoulder right here as a tripod, and I just didn't breathe for the longest period of time. Castellano wasn't in any big rush. Took a couple of puffs on the cigar and got in the car and drove off.
The photographs were dynamite. The FBI knew that such striking visual evidence was just the thing to put in front of a jury. In February 1985, the FBI seized all 5 members of the commission. Agents O'Brien and Currens arrested Castellano and drove him to FBI headquarters in Manhattan.
Federal authorities and New York City and state law enforcement officials today announced one of the most important indictments of Mafia bosses in this nation's history.
In the car on the way to FBI headquarters, Castellano heard a radio news bulletin about the arrests.
Charges of racketeering and extortion. The charges carry prison sentences of up to 20 years. From New York, NPR's Mike Schuster.
It was the beginning of the end of Castellano's reign.
Made their move late last night. Among those now facing federal racketeering and extortion charges are Paul Castellano, head of the Gambino family. The key to the investigation was an electronic bug.
He turned to Joe, I remember, and he said, "Is that true? Is that true? You listened to my private conversations."
Prosecutors say the recordings are of superb quality.
You could almost hear him like groan.
The agents thought Castellano was squirming because they had taped his criminal conversations. But Castellano realized they had also learned about his secret affair with his young Colombian maid.
This was very embarrassing to him. It's a little embarrassing to us, too, for that matter.
He's almost like a little boy now, confessing this, something that he did was bad. He's not talking about it was bad that I murdered people or had, on my authority, people were murdered. I'm embarrassed because I had this relationship with this young woman who was my maid, you know, right under my wife's nose.
This was a revelation a Mafia Don could not afford. He'd broken one of Mafia's most sacred rules. It was okay to maim and murder, but not to publicly dishonor your wife. Castellano awaited trial where the photos would be key evidence. If the New York mob wanted to know what a Mafia war was like, they needed look no further than Sicily. Here, the Mafia's boss was Toto Riina, an elusive, psychopathic killer from the town of Corleone. Corleone was a Mafia stronghold set high in the mountains of central Sicily. It was the place that gave its name to Marlon Brando's character in the film The Godfather. Riina's cruelty earned him the name The Beast. Corleone had an unenviable reputation as a place where only the toughest mafiosi were born and bred, as one local anti-mafia fighter remembers.
I mafiosi di Corleone una volta ho incontrato.
I once met a Corleone Mafia person, and he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Listen, to be a real man, you need to have spent a few years in jail." This is the philosophy of the Corleone Mafia. For them, going to jail is like a baptism. A mafia member who hasn't been to jail isn't a real mafioso.
Riina's crime family had seized control of the Mafia in a vicious war. In Palermo, in the early 80s, the streets were soaked with the blood of Riina's victims. During one 6-month period, a body was found in the city every 3 days. Palermo's mayor was Leo Luca Orlando, elected to office promising to end such crimes. Even 20 years later, his courageous stand means he must have an armed guard 24 hours a day.
Palermo was a city just living in silence and in dark. The way the citizens to avoid to be involved in these killings was to deny that the mafia does exist. Just to say, we don't see, we don't speak, we don't hear, it's not our problem, they kill each other, there's no risk for us. If we don't speak about the mafia, we will never be killed.
The man leading the hunt for Riina was an investigating magistrate named Judge Giovanni Falcone. He had grown up in a rough area of Palermo, where some of his schoolboy friends later became mafiosi. Unlike them, he had chosen to fight for the law rather than against it. From his headquarters in Palermo's Palace of Justice, Falcone had been battling the mafia for over a decade. In 1987, he enjoyed his greatest victory. In the Maxi trial, over 300 mafiosi have been sent to prison, their sentences totaling almost 3,000 years. It was the most stunning blow the Sicilian mafia had ever received. But Mafia boss Toto Riina had escaped the roundup. He remained free, running his criminal empire from an unknown hiding place. Falcone faced another danger, this one closer to home. He had few friends at the Palace of Justice. The people of Palermo stood on the sidelines, waiting to see who would come out on top, Falcone or the Mafia. Falcone rented a vacation apartment on the beach, half an hour's drive from Palermo. When he went there, it seemed that most of Palermo knew about it.
When Falcone was on the move, it was like a wedding party. There were lots of cars, even a helicopter in the sky above. So everyone knew that Falcone was at the beach house.
Yet the ring of steel that protected Falcone made little difference to Riina. One afternoon in June 1989, Falcone relaxed by the beach. An inquisitive security guard noticed the sports bag by the house, seemingly forgotten in the rocks by the water's edge. When he peered inside the bag, he noticed electric wires connected to 58 sticks of plastic explosives. The bag was wired to explode if it was picked up. The bomb did not go off. Falcone had cheated death. Soon after the assassination attempt, Falcone spoke to one of his closest friends in the fight against the Mafia. He made a chilling prediction.
Come lui diceva poi,